This is TTS Times Wire News, providing fast and efficient narrations of the latest news articles for those on the go. We upload every weekday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Be sure to like and subscribe. The American Conservative. The American Conservative.com. Biden's empire moment. Fresh airstrikes on Iranian proxies in Iraq and Syria come at a time of fresh Republican skepticism of the military, and just as a career-aspirant president settles into the trappings of power. Curt Mills, June 30, 2021, 12 a.m. It's a maneuver that's become as routine as slipping into athleisure and dialing into Zoom. Early this week, we read again of airstrikes in the Middle East, the latest in a tit-for-tat with agents of Iran. At President Biden's direction, U.S. military forces earlier this evening conducted defensive precision airstrikes against facilities used by Iran-backed militia groups in the Iraq-Syria border region, senior Pentagon spokesman John F. Kirby said in a statement. The strikes were both necessary to address the threat and appropriately limited in scope. As a matter of domestic law, the president took this action pursuant to his Article 2 authority to protect U.S. personnel in Iraq, Kirby continued. Those with a sense of déjà vu could be excused. In a new administration with recycled personnel galore from the Obama administration, Jen Psaki is the face of the White House, Domestic Policy Council head Susan Rice in an executive encore tour, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in the likely role he would have occupied in a Hillary Clinton administration. Perhaps no figure is more a retread than Kirby. The retired admiral served Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel in Alexandria, before a bizarre ouster at the hands of Hagel's successor, Ash Carter, and a swift recovery at State Under Secretary of State John Kerry. He is now starring in a swan song under Secretary Lloyd Austin at Joe Biden's Pentagon. And through it all, one could observe, the United States has been bombing Iraq and Syria. Several items are at play here. First, the strikes on the cadres of Iran, not the president's first, represent a one-step forward, two-step backward moment, for many who hope Mr. Biden will prove a surprise beacon of restraint. The administration had tacitly backed a congressional revocation of the 2002 Authorization of Use of Military Force, AUMF, the fateful legislation that gave the green light to George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq, and the expenditure of years more of blood and treasure in the region, on a supremely tangential basis. This had won plaudits from those who wished for reform. The good news: President Biden is willing to throw Bush administration law on the scrap heap of history. The bad: he has, evidently, taken a Bourbon view, nearly invoking l'état c'est moi of his authority. Under the Biden view, the authorization can be revoked because, in foreign affairs at least, as one former president once explained, when the president does it, that means it's not illegal. So, the AUF is wrong because it is redundant. I directed last night's airstrikes, targeting sites used by the Iranian-backed militia group responsible for recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq, and I have that authority under Article 2, Biden said this week, referring to the section of the Constitution that grants presidential powers. This from a president who once voted to rebuke that former president, Richard Nixon, by voting for the War Powers Act of 1973, at the height of Vietnam, and in his first year in Senate. And even those up on the Hill who are reluctant to acknowledge that have acknowledged that is the case, Biden said this week, digging in his heels. But they haven't. The danger here is that you fall into a pattern of military escalation that becomes war without voters ever having a say. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who made his bones in the Trump era as a champion of diplomacy, told Politico. Even old guard hawks in Biden's ranks are flummoxed, underling the authority enunciated under Article I, that is Congress power. Congress has the power to authorize the use of military force and declarations of war, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is planning to hear from the administration more on these strikes, Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey told the outlet. And President Biden now risks the cross-partisan acclaim he'd achieved with his May Afghanistan withdrawal announcement. We've got ourselves into a real pickle in Iraq and Syria. William Ruger, Vice President of Foreign Policy at Stand Together, told me. He was Donald Trump's choice to be ambassador to Afghanistan, and has praised the new administration on its policy on America's longest war. We end up needing to defend troops in those countries that aren't required to be there in the first place, as happened over the weekend. The administration emphasized that the strikes were fundamentally defensive in nature, after recent spasms of Iranian proxies in region. Though Biden continues to sail through a honeymoon of sorts, with a clear, majoritarian approval rating, struggles loom. Biden's maneuver comes as conservatives are poised to be skeptical of military action, and even the military, like never before in the modern era, an environment Biden's Democratic predecessor Barack Obama did not have to grapple with, when complaints about the Pentagon and foreign policy were essentially fringe, fair or not. Perhaps the nation's most significant Republican, Tucker Carlson, tore into the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff just last week, haranguing him for perceived partisanship, and what he saw as a grandstanding admonishment of white rage. And unlike when Trump struck Iran, Biden, in theory, wants to imminently do a deal with Iran. A tight timeline exists this summer before the lame duck, incumbent government of Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his hardline successor, Ibrahim Raisi. The future president underlined this week clear, unbowed protocols for a second deal. Such apparent intractability on the issue is why many observers, including this one, thought Biden would take a look at a second deal and take a pass. But here, too, is where the alumni atmosphere of the Biden administration is significant. From Psaki to Kirby to Rice to Sullivan to Secretary of State Antony Blinken to U.S. Deputy of State Wendy Sherman, who one former senior Trump administration official derided as the biggest appeaser in government, and on, it's an old gang, committed, whatever underreported Biden's personal rivalry with Obama, to cementing their old boss's legacy beyond mere celebrity. For advocates of restraint, however, that has meant in the early going enshrining the former constitutional law professor's creative interpretations of executive authority. About the author. Curt Mills is senior reporter at the American Conservative, covering national security, the Biden White House and the future of the Republicans. He has reported for the National Interest, U.S. News and World Report, Newsweek, Washington Examiner, Unheard, The Spectator, among others. He was a 2018 to 2019 Robert Novak Journalism Fellow, and has been a Fellow at Defense Priorities and the Claremont Institute. He is a native and resident of Washington, D.C. The American Conservative exists to advance a Main Street conservatism. We cherish local community, the liberties bequeathed us by the founders, the civilizational foundations of faith and family, and, we are not ashamed to use the word, peace. Copyright 2021 The American Conservative. Thanks for joining us at TTS Times Wire News. Be sure to like and subscribe to get fast and efficient narrations of the latest news articles for those on the go. We upload every weekday at noon Eastern Standard Time. See you next time on The Wire, and be sure to like and subscribe.